The opinions expressed during this show are not necessarily those of this station, its employees, or advertisers, but are solely the opinions of the host and the guests that appear on the show. It's time now for Tea Party Talk with Tom Z, hosted by Tom Zawistowski, president of the We the People Convention and executive director of the Portage County Tea Party. Get ready to become a totally engaged American who is informed about the critical issues that are affecting the welfare and individual rights of all Americans today.
S&K Asphalt and Concrete has been serving residential, commercial, and industrial customers since 1988 with quality paving services. The experts at S&K Asphalt and Concrete have the knowledge and experience to meet your paving needs. From parking lots to driveways to repairs and resurfacing, S&K paves the way. Call today for a free estimate. 330-724-9090. That's 330-724-9090. Or visit online at skasphaltconcrete.com.
Are you concerned about your family's safety? Now, Target Thing Pro Shop is a female-friendly gun shop, range, and training center. Target Thing is in Garrettsville. We're on the web at targetthing.com. Target Thing is where they offer guns, ammo, and training to help you keep your family safe. Target Thing Pro Shop.
Fed up with politicians who care more about special interests than people on Main Street? So is Opportunity Ohio. We're working hard to solve Ohio's toughest challenges so Ohioans can create more jobs to grow our economy. See our plans and consider a tax-deductible contribution at opportunityohio.org. Invest $25 for a signed copy of Matt Mayer's book, The Founding Debate, Where Should the Power Over Our Lives Reside? Please visit opportunityohio.org.
All right, and good morning, and welcome to Tea Party Talk with Tom Z. I'm Tom Zawistowski, and we're awful glad to have you with us this morning for today's show. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us either on Wednesday mornings at 10:30 when we record the show live, or on Saturdays from 9 until 9:30 on 640 WHLO in Akron, Ohio. Or if you're on iHeartRadio nationally at www.640whlo.com. We certainly appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming to hear what the Tea Party has on its mind. And as I say often in our show, I do not speak for the Tea Party. Nobody speaks for the Tea Party. The Tea Party is a bunch of groups, just regular citizens who make up their own minds about what they think and do. But I do have my finger on the pulse of the Tea Party, and we are able to basically, pass on to you the things that are on the minds of Tea Partiers all over the state. With us this morning, we have a special guest that I'm really happy to have on the show with me. His name is Rob Walgate, who is the vice president for the American Policy Roundtable. And the American Policy Roundtable was really the Tea Party before there was a Tea Party. And it was founded by Dave Zanotti, a person who those of us in the conservative movement in Ohio have a great deal of affection for. He's a great patriot. And Rob, I want to thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Rob today about his testimony in front of the Ohio Constitution Modernization Commission about term limits. But, Rob, before we go there, I guess I need to ask you to tell the listeners just what the Ohio Constitution Modernization Commission is.
Well, the Ohio Constitution Modernization Commission was established in 2011 by the General Assembly, and it was an idea as well as Governor John Kasich. When you look back in the 70s, we had a revision commission that took a look at the Ohio Constitution, and they wanted to kind of redo that again and take a look at the Ohio Constitution. And this commission, made up of lawmakers and public citizens, although the public citizens portion, a lot of those public citizens per se, have a lot of ties to the State House and the Capitol. They're going to take a look at the Constitution as a whole and come up with any recommendations they think should be made to possibly clean it up or to possibly alter it in any way, and then they would make recommendations to the General Assembly. The General Assembly would take it from there and decide whether they would put a joint resolution together and whether we should go to the voters to make changes to our Constitution.
So one of those recommendations that they're kind of studying and talking about has to do with term limits, which is something very near and dear to your heart and that of Dave Zanotti and the American Policy Roundtable. So just what are they thinking of doing, and what was your testimony about that?
Well, term limits was passed in 1992, and many of your listeners probably remember, Tom. That was at a time where getting to the ballot in Ohio was a bit different than it was today. When you got in 1992, when you collected enough signatures to go to the ballot for a constitutional amendment, that meant a lot of hardworking men and women went out and collected those signatures, went out and talked to their neighbors, and got enough people to sign to get language on the ballot. And what that language did was it limited the terms of state reps and state senators to 8 consecutive years. That's all it did. So state senators have 2 terms, state reps have 4 terms, and then they had to leave that body of the legislature. They could go over to the Senate if they were in the House, and they could go back to the House if they were in the Senate. So there wasn't the ability to that. But what you saw across the country were states taking a look at these lifetime politicians, and they were getting a bit fed up with it. The leadership was staying the same. Things were getting stale. So the people wanted change across the country, and especially in Ohio. And that's why we amended our Constitution in 1992.
So, Rob, I would say that, that is still the attitude of people today, at least in the conservative movement. I think we've been happy with term limits. So what's their problem? What do they want to do?
They have a number of complaints. One, I believe, is control, but they're not going to tell you that. But the one you hear most often, and this is the one I always smile and shake my head. In my testimony last week, by the way, I read about a page and a half and just tried to outline the history of term limits in Ohio and talk about how the language was carefully constructed to give that balance, that 8-year balance, the same that the governor's office has 8 years in the executive branch. Now you're going to have a balance in the legislative branch. And I just laid that out, how the language was looked at. Some states had, quote-unquote, death penalties. One of the terms they used is the fact that once you serve, you can't go back and serve again. Ohio didn't have that, but doesn't have that to this day. But one of the arguments and complaints, Tom, is you hear the term institutional knowledge. We're losing institutional knowledge in Ohio, and that's just absolutely false. When you look at the Ohio Senate, the state Senate, we have 33 members. Out of those 33 members, 21 served previously or served in the House of Representatives. So there's plenty of institutional knowledge there. And when you look at the House side, and this is what I always point to, and no one in Republican leadership can defend this, but when you look at the House side, we have a gentleman down there named Ron Amstutz. Ron has over 30 years' experience in the legislature, is probably one of the brightest minds when it comes to the state budget there is. Yet Ron was not chosen to be Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
The party choice was chosen to be Speaker of the House. So if the party really cares about institutional knowledge, why wouldn't they make the guy with the most institutional knowledge the Speaker of the House? That makes no sense to me.
Well, and Rob, you and I know a lot of these guys. We've talked to a lot of them over the years. People in the House and the Senate. You don't need to be a nuclear physicist to do this, right? I mean, the Constitution was set up to be government of the people, by the people, for the people, and I just see this as elitism. I just see this as the ruling class, imposing their power on us.
Well, in my words, offended a few of them, and I had to apologize because I know my words offended a few of them last week. I used the term career politician. I used the term self-serving. When the commission I testified in front of on that committee, which was part of the commission, I believe there was 9 or 10 members on that committee as part of the commission. But former Governor Taft is on there. Former Speaker Joanne Davidson is on there. Fred Mills chairs the committee, who used to work for Speaker Davidson. So it's a lot of people that are very tied to the process. And what they do is they try and come across like it's so intimidating, like the process is so intimidating, and the average person just won't know what's going on. And that's absolutely false. That is not true at all when you take a look at it. And I made the statement a few years ago when they were looking to extend term limits and talking about it. And someone said, well, once you get down here 8 years, you're just getting your feet wet. And I knew this person had a child that would be entering the workforce soon. And I said, you know what? I hope when your child goes for their first job interview, they tell the person interviewing them, it's going to take me 8 years to find out where the bathroom is. It's going to take me 8 years to get my feet wet. That is accepted nowhere else in society. So why do we allow the lawmakers to continue to spin these tales? And they want to extend it to 12 years is one of the proposals they're talking about. But truth of the matter is they want to make careers out of it. And when you read the comments of Bill Batchelder when he left the Speaker's chair this past year at the end of 2014, there was no doubt about it that his remarks mentioned someone who has a desire for a career in politics, we're limiting them. And to that I say I'm glad.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's, isn't that what the Founding Fathers talked about? Is the Constitution is there to limit government, not to give it power, but to withhold power so that it represents the people. But Rob, like you, I went through the list of all the people on this commission, the Ohio Constitution Modernization Commission, and there wasn't a single blue-collar person there. Every single one of them was an attorney, or some, they were all college graduates. And they literally had political experience. So how are they acting on our behalf? How are they acting for the good of the people?
We knew this commission was going to be put together soon after the governor took office. And as many people know, I have a lawsuit, the Roundtable does, my name's on it personally as well, against Governor Kasich in front of the Ohio Supreme Court right now. So when we talk about this, it's not like he's big fans of us or what we do. But when we knew this was being put together, we called Speaker Batchelder and let him know that someone from our office, preferably Dave Zanotti, our CEO, or Melanie Elsie, our legislative director, have as much knowledge regarding the Ohio Constitution as anyone in the state, I feel, would have loved to participate in that commission because they could have brought insight, they could have brought guidance, they could have brought experience, and they also could have brought let me just say the willingness of the taxpayer to be represented.
Yes.
When I went down there and testified, and I used the terms that I mentioned earlier in the show, they were offending, and I did apologize, but I thought, they must have had a little bit of truth to them if they stung so hard.
Sure.
One of the media members pulled me out in the hallway afterwards and talked to me about term limits, and I said, what's crazy? Is the only people that are talking about extending the terms of politicians are walking the halls of the State House. When you walk around the state of Ohio and you walk up to someone and say, hey, do you think politicians should be serving longer in office? How many people do you think say yes?
Well, I think there's people in the Tea Party who would pay money to be able to get this for our federal representatives. That's for sure. So,
remember, Tom, that passed in 1992 as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We passed a law in Ohio to limit the terms of our congressional representation, and the court struck that down. So that's very important to point out. The other thing I think it's important to point out to listeners, because this is an argument I heard last week, is some of the states that authorized term limits in the 90s have moved away, and they've repealed them, or they've taken them off the books. But what's important to know about that, not one of those has happened by a vote of the people. Either legislators or courts have deemed those term limits not to be applicable.
I see.
The people have never voted them away.
Okay.
So it's very important to know that because that's an argument the other side uses often.
Well, we have about 1 minute left, and so that's the important point I want our listeners to understand. The way this works then is if they recommend that they want to change the term limits, it would go to the House and the Senate, I believe, and then it would go on the ballot, and we would get the vote on it. Is that the deal, Rob?
They have to get a recommendation from 2/3 of the commission. It would then be sent to the General Assembly. They would put a joint resolution together, and they would want to amend our Constitution.
Okay, yeah. So we would have a vote. They can't just jam this down our throat in Ohio. We would have a say in this, right?
You will hear us loud and clear, Tom, opposing it, and all your listeners will as well. Yes.
Well, and there's other things they're thinking of doing, right? So people can go to their the website for the Ohio Modernization Constitutional Modernization Commission, and they're talking about a lot of things. So, folks, if you want to go testify and do what Rob did, it would help our cause. Stand up for our rights. Don't let them just grab them. And, Rob, we appreciate you going down there and taking your valuable time to speak for all of us. Thanks so much for doing that.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tom. Thanks for all you do.
Look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay?
Sounds great.
All right. You're listening to Tea Party Talk with Tom Z, and we'll be back after these messages.
I'm Nick Skiriotis, president of S&K Asphalt and Concrete. As a Greek immigrant who came to America legally, my family and I have lived the American dream of freedom, hope, and opportunity. But that dream is fading due to an out-of-control federal government that is mixed up worse than a soup sandwich. We have a president who is putting more and more regulations on businesses, which is stomping economic and job growth. Government has taken more and more of our freedoms. They have taken over our health care and are trying to take over our schools with Common Core. We as Americans must wake up, get involved before it is too late. We must fight to preserve the America our founders created, a nation that was founded on faith, family, and freedom. The fight is not easy, but anything worth fighting for never is. Our founders paid a heavy price for freedom. 5 of them did not live to see the independence they were fighting for. 9 of them were tortured. 12 of them lost everything they owned, and 3 of them lost their families. Now it is our turn to sacrifice and to fight to preserve our freedoms and the American dream. I am Nick Skiriotis, president of S&K Asphalt and Concrete, and I approve this message.
Fed up with politicians who care more about special interests than people on Main Street? So is Opportunity Ohio. We're working hard to solve Ohio's toughest challenges so Ohioans can create more jobs to grow our economy. See our plans and consider a tax-deductible contribution at opportunityohio.org. Invest $25 for a signed copy of Matt Mayer's book, The Founding Debate: Where Should the Power Over Our Lives Reside? Please visit opportunityohio.org.
Right, and we are back, and thank you for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Rob Walgate, and we thank Rob and the American Policy Roundtable for standing up for us, and we'll keep an eye on what's going on with this commission and keep you posted on that. We're going to talk now about some of the things that from last week. I owe an apology to John Lewis, the gentleman, the House member from Georgia, who I mentioned last week in my piece about racism, because I had said that he had been involved with the True the Vote, sicking the federal government on True the Vote. And I had him confused with Elijah Cummings from Maryland, who was under a probe for his targeting of True the Vote. However, John Lewis was involved in something else that I want to bring to your attention, because we talked about Selma 50 years ago, and how we just weren't handling the race issues properly. Well, I ran across a TV show this week called Hating Breitbart, which is a very good video for you to see if you want to understand how the left works and how to combat them. But in that video, one of the key things was when Mr. Lewis and Representative Andre Carson basically accused the Tea Party protesters on March 20th of 2010 when they were going to sign the Obamacare bill. If you remember, Nancy Pelosi had her big, oversized the thing she used to hit to call the room to order, her mallet or whatever that's called. And basically, they were going to the House, and John Lewis and Andre Carson claimed that Tea Party people surrounded them, called them nigger 15 times, spit on them, and made all these accusations. Okay? Well, the fact of the matter is, that did not happen, all right? And Breitbart investigated that, and he basically offered a reward of like $100,000 for anyone who could provide video that showed that this was true. And the Black Congressional Caucus got behind this and basically was painting the Tea Party, you listeners, as racist. That we used the N-word, we spit on blacks as they were going, black congressmen, for God's sake. And it just wasn't true. Matter of fact, the whole thing about the Breitbart investigation showed that they had actually written the press release before they left the building and fed it to the media. And Breitbart proved that this wasn't true. And this is what bothers me about the people who are supposedly fighting, to help race relations. How does that help race relations when the Black Congressional Caucus contrives a story to paint millions of patriotic Americans as racist when we're not? See, this is just wrong. And Martin Luther King would have never put up with such a thing. And I, in my comments last week when I talked about this story, I also talked about what the Black Congressional Caucus should really be focusing on. And what that was this change in the laws that happened back in the 60s that basically made it so that we destroyed the black family, all right? And I came across an article this week that talks about Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a Democrat, a very powerful Democrat, who basically was working for the Labor Department. He was a staffer working for the Labor Department back when this law was being changed. And when he was there, he wrote this report called The Negro Family, the Case for National Action. Okay? Well, guess what? We talked about 50 years ago, Selma, we were celebrating that. Well, surprise, surprise, that release, that report that Moynihan wrote, The Negro Family, a Case for National Action, was just leaked this past July. It took 50 years for this to come to light, okay? And in that story, he talked about the crisis that only 23.6% of African-American births were to unmarried women, that he thought that was high. But since then, you basically have, academic sensitivity enforcers and race mongers denounced Moynihan as a racist when he wrote this report, and he was blaming the victims. But today, 72% of African-American children are born to single women. 48% of first births of all races and ethnicities are to unmarried women. So basically, it's out of whack. 72% of blacks versus 48% of all others, okay? And in this report, there was a quote. It says, today a nation dismayed by inequality and the intergenerational transmission of poverty must face the truth that political scientist Lawrence Mead enunciated nearly 25 years ago. The inequalities that stem from the workplace are now trivial in comparison to those stemming from family structure. What matters for success is less whether your father was rich or poor, but whether you knew your father at all. I urge the Black Congressional Congress. I urge, these Black congressmen, whether they be Elijah Cummings or John Lewis or Andre Carson, quit blaming the people who had nothing to do with this tragedy and fix the law that literally keeps this going, that pays black women not to have husbands. You're destroying the black family, and you're doing it intentionally so they will be dependent on you and you can get their votes, and that's horrific. That's just horrific. Moving forward, talking about other things that are horrific, we've got the Hillary, emails and her foundation giving, okay, and James Carville, her spinmeister for the Clintons, actually admitted this week that the reason Hillary Clinton had her own server and did not, make, as the law requires, all of her emails available for the public record was because she was trying to avoid accountability and oversight. That's literally what he said, okay? And here's what's really frightening about that. What's really frightening about that is that, when she's getting $2 million from a Chinese company that's tied directly to the Chinese government, okay, while she's Secretary of State, she's on our payroll, she's flying around the world, and she's getting these donations, and she's hiding her emails. It's because the rules don't apply to her. The big story now this week is, well, Hillary's just not an ordinary employee. Well, what is she, royalty? She's not royalty. She works for us. She's a government employee, and she needs to follow the rules. But, folks, it's like I tell you all the time. The only people following the rules are us, the common folks. We believe in the Constitution. We follow the rules. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, they don't. Barack Obama doesn't. That's the problem in our country. You can't have a representative form of government when no one believes in the rules, okay? And there's a report out, a study that just came out recently that says that our belief in government, our confidence in government is at an all-time low, okay? And basically it says that only 23% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in the Supreme Court, only 11% in the executive branch, and 5% in Congress. That's just unbelievable. That's just, how do you run a country that way? And that goes back to the book I've talked to you about in the past called White Collar Government, where this gentleman wrote a book where he studied all the legislators, from Supreme Court to the president, to U.S. Senate, U.S. House, to governors, state Congress, House and Senate, all the way down. And what they found is no one's there representing you. No one's there representing you. And like Rob said, in our interview earlier, I looked at that commission, okay, that's going to decide how do we want to change our Constitution. None of them are blue collar. None of them represent you. You think you might just have some, since we're 84% of the population doesn't have a college degree, that there should be representation by us? But there's not, folks. There's not. So this is what's facing us. These are the problems. Now, again, we're talking about transparency. Okay. Well, there's another issue about transparency. Hillary's not being transparent. The president wasn't transparent, whether it was about Benghazi or Fast and Furious or the IRS. I mean, the Associated Press is suing now the Justice Department and the State Department to get access to these emails. Well, up in Ottawa County, we've got this bizarre case of a woman named Elspeth Baumgardner who actually went to prison for 5 years because she dared to request records about some school district funds that she thought was being misused. And the courts up there, these judges trying to protect their powerful friends, actually sent her to prison because they said she was a threat to them. She threatened them. Well, now she's out of prison, and she's continuing to follow up on her case. And this judge in Ottawa County basically said that she is banned from going to the courthouse or talking to anyone in the courthouse. And the Sandusky Register went after him and forced him to change that order. And now there's a woman up there who's an activist. Her name is Tracy Tom, who is holding today, the 18th of March, a public records day, where she's basically teaching people to go to the Ottawa County Courthouse and ask for public records to show that we won't be denied. And you think this isn't a big deal. But Dave Yost just announced, our auditor just announced, that for the first time, Ohioans can pursue public records complaints against state agencies and public universities without filing costly court cases. Ohio Auditor Dave Yost announced today the creation of a Sunshine Audit Program to field complaints about governmental agencies failing to turn over public records or violating other provisions of the open records laws. Folks, the problem is the people who work for us despise us because when you can't be fired from your job no matter what you do, why would you care? Why would you care? That's the problem that we have. And that's the problem that we've got to fix because they do work for us. And if they aren't responsive to us, they can do anything. And they're doing some pretty horrific things. Now, one good thing that did happen this week is that Governor Kasich finally signed House Bill 7, which was passed by the House and the Senate, and it was a big win for Heidi Huber and all the volunteers at Ohioans Against Common Core because House Bill 7 basically makes it okay for you to opt out of the Common Core testing, the PARC testing. So it's a small step. There's lots more to be done, but that was a big win for them. We are also, though, concerned about Governor Kasich, who's threatening to have a state-run healthcare exchange against the Ohio Healthcare Amendment, which passed by 66% of all the people in the state in 2011. He's threatening that he's going to do that if the Supreme Court in the King Burwell case rules that you can't subsidize people in the federal exchange, which we have now. Now, Governor Kasich signed that himself. He signed that himself, and for him to say he's going to have a state exchange when he signed the amendment that prohibits them would just be horrific, and we urge the governor not to do that. Got a couple things to close the show out with today. If you'd like to do this, they're going to have a Tax Day rally in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Tea Party's annual Tax Day rally on April 15th at the Sharonville Convention Center. They're going to have some great speakers, Jenny Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots, Matt Kibbe from Freedom Works, Brian Thomas from WKRC. You can order your tickets at the bit.ly at CTPTAX Day 2015. That's their website. I'll give that to you again. If you want to send me an email at teapartytalkwithtomz.com, I'll send you that information. But I appreciate you joining us today. I hope you learned some things about our Constitution, and we hope you'll come back and join us again next week. You've been listening to Tea Party Talk with Tom Z. We'll see you next week.
This is former State Representative Matt Lynch inviting you to join me for common sense conservative conversation each Wednesday evening at 6:30 p.m. on How I See It. You can listen live or listen to the podcast anytime, 24/7 at mattlynch.com. Each week I am joined by my daughter Karen Quay on a rhino hunt as we separate the phonies from the real conservatives who are willing to stand up for faith, family, and freedom. We challenge the politically correct politicians who say one thing to get your vote, then do another once they are in office. 2015 is a new year, but too many of our politicians didn't get the message that business as usual in Washington is no longer acceptable. If our representatives in Congress are too scared or too weak to speak up, then we must raise our voices and demand they fight back against the liberal loonies. Never forget that we, the voters, are in charge, and we are the masters of our government, and we cannot let politicians ever forget it. So listen in every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. or anytime at mattlynch.com. I'm Matt Lynch, and that's how I see it.